Research has shown that data analysts and data scientists spend 80% of their time on preparing and cleaning data for analysis. And surprisingly, during the survey, most of the data scientists and data analysts described this process as the least enjoyable part of their work. So in this video, I'm going to show you how you can automate your data cleaning processes in Excel using Power Query to save you a lot of time, especially on repetitive tasks. The dataset that we are going to use is an extract from an ERP system. It simply sells data that comes in on a monthly basis, and this is how it looks. Now, assuming you are in finance and you receive such a kind of data on a monthly basis, of course it requires cleaning before you make it ready for data analysis. And the first thing that you have to do is to identify which areas require cleaning. For example, you can note in this dataset that there are a lot of merged cells. For example, this value over here is sitting in 3 columns, that is H, I, and J. So we need to get rid of these multiple merged cells. You will also notice that the column width and the row height are not of the same size. For example, you can see clearly that some of them are very small compared to others. There is also a lot of blank rows and columns. For example, the entire of column A is totally blank, and all these small rows are entirely blank. You will also notice that most of the number values are stored as text, as you can see these small green rectangles on top of each value, as well as the entire of this column contains both the date and the time values, so we need to separate these values, and so many other transformations that we shall be doing. So we are going to load these files into the Power Query, and let us start right now. So let me close this file and show you the folder where I have some of these files that we are going to use. So all the 4 files that we are going to clean are in this folder, and each file has approximately 50,000 rows of data. Now I'll go ahead and open a blank workbook from scratch. So when it opens, I'll first save this file. Let me save it right on the desktop. I just give it a random name, Power Query. Let's also rename this sheet over here Power Query. So the first thing that I have to do in this blank workbook is to locate my folder that contains the files that we are going to work with. I will use Power Query to do that, so I'll go ahead and click on the Data ribbon tab, click on Get Data from File, and then I'll navigate over to this option which says From Folder. Now at this level, I need to locate the folder that contains our files that we need to grab using Power Query. This is the folder that contains the files, so I select the folder and say Open. On this window, the Power Query is showing us the file names that we have in the folder and the file extension. So the most important thing, I have to come over to these options and then click on the drop down for Combine. 3 options will pop up. I need to go ahead and click on Combine and Transform Data. So what the Power Query has done at this level is that it has grabbed one of the files in the folder and used it as a sample, and then it shows you the worksheet that it has found in that specific workbook. So when I point over to this one, I'll get a preview of the entire dataset. So I'm convinced. I'll go ahead and click on OK. So after finalizing the evaluation, the data will be loaded into the Power Query editor. So Power Query has automatically handled the initial transformation steps, and I can see this is the final query, and also a sample query has been loaded for us. On the right, you can see all the applied steps, and the good thing is that every single step in the transformation process is getting recorded by the Power Query. So we shall do all the cleanup from the transform sample file query, and later we shall load all the changes into the final transactions query. So I'll go ahead and click on the transform sample file query. So from here, let's now start cleaning up the dataset. So the first thing that we have to do is to remove some of the top rows that are totally blank. So I click over here, and then I navigate over to remove top rows. So it's asking me for the number of rows that I want to get rid. When you look from the top, I want to remove 7 rows so that I can maintain the column headers. Click OK. Those ones are gone, and you can see the step is recorded over here. The other thing, you can see that our first row contains our column headers, so we need to promote them as our official column headers. So I'll come over again and click here once. Choose this option, use the first row as headers. Let me collapse this queries pane to create more working space. So I can go ahead and rename the column headers. This is order number. This is account number. I'm just double clicking and renaming the column headers. I rename this to customer number. This is customer name. This one I call it amount paid. And all the rest of the columns are entirely blank. As you can see, they have null values. Next step is to get rid of the entire empty columns. Column number 1 is entirely blank. You can see it has null values all the way through. So I'll click on it. While I maintain the Control key on the keyboard pressed, I also click on column 9. It's also entirely blank. Column 21 and 22. All of them are blank. So I've selected all the blank columns. So I'll go ahead and right click and say remove columns. And you'll see that particular step in our applied steps section. The other cleanup that we have to do is to get rid of all the empty rows. How do we do that? You'll come and click on this option, remove rows. You just point on the drop down, and when these options pop up, you pick remove blank rows. Assume you had to remove all these blank rows from the Excel file that we saw manually. This would of course consume and waste a lot of your time. You can see the step is applied over here. So our data is starting to really take shape. So the next thing, let's confirm the data types that are sitting in each single column. For example, the order number, this is a whole number. You can come over and change to any data type of your choice. We make this one a whole number because these are kilowatt hours of energy purchased. This one will be currency. Then for the date and time values, we need to separate this column. So I'll go ahead and highlight the column. Come over to this option for split column. Click on the drop down. We shall use by delimiter option. So the delimiter that we've identified that is separating the time from the date is a space. So I'll come over here and choose space. I'm comfortable with the pre-selected option, each occurrence of the delimiter. I click OK. Now you can see the time and date values have been separated. Let's go ahead and rename the column headers. I'll call this one date. Then I'll call this one time. However, you will notice for the time column, if you try to change the data type to time, it will give us an error because the hours, minutes, and seconds are separated with a full stop, not a full colon. Let's try and do that. You see, if we change it to time, we get an error, of course, because the separator of the hour, minute, and second is a full stop. So we need to make a replacement of the values. I'll go ahead and get rid of this step. Now let's replace the full stops with a full colon. With the column selected, I will right click, navigate over to this option which says replace values. I'll find the full stop, replace it with a full colon, click OK. You can see how simple things are with the Power Query. Now that we have the correct separators in between the hours, minutes, and seconds, let's change the data type to time. We've now gone through most of the transformations and cleanup that we are supposed to do. Now, before we move to the next step, if you're enjoying this video, give it a like, leave a comment. I'll be glad to connect with you. And if you're finding value, kindly subscribe for more videos like this. So the next step is to close the Power Query and load this data back into our worksheet. I'll first expand this queries pane. Click over here on the final transactions query. Of course, you can see this final transactions query that we need to load is giving us an error because of the transformations to the column headers that we've done. So it's unable to read some of the columns. And so what we have to do is to come to these applied steps and remove the change type step. And you can see our data looks very clean. One more column that we have to get rid of is this source name. We don't need this column, so I'll go ahead and remove it. Now we are good to go. The next step is to close and load. So I'll come over to the home ribbon tab of my Power Query editor. Click on this option, close and load, but make sure you're clicking in the drop down. Choose the second option, close and load to. Now from here we have a number of options where we can load our data. We shall not discuss each single option here, but you have a choice to either create only a connection and load it to the data model. But for this particular example, I'm going to load it into the pivot table report. and I'll choose the existing workbook. I'll locate the exact cell where I want to load my pivot table report. Let me pick B2, click OK. So you can see that the Power Query is going through all the 4 files. 71,830 rows of data has been loaded into this query. From here now we can start building our report. For example, I want to see how much each sales rep has made. So I will drag the operators onto the rows. I drag the paid amount column into the values. Now I can format my numbers. Number formatting, use 1000 separator. So I can rename the column headers of my pivot. I call this one sales rep. I can call this one sales amount. Can also go ahead and change the design of the report. So one thing that I've forgotten is to extract the month name out of the date, because I want to create a slicer to filter this report based on the month. So I'll go ahead and go back into the Power Query editor by double clicking on this file. Inside the Power Query editor, I need to create a fresh column that will extract the month name from this date. So how do we do that? I'll come over to this option, add column from examples, from the selection. So you can see that the Power Query is asking me to enter sample values in the new column that I want extracted from this column. So this Power Query add column from example works exactly the same way as the flash fill feature. So I'll go ahead and double click in the first row of the new column that I want to create, and a number of options will pop up. So what I want extracted is the month name. So I'll double click this option. Now I'll point my cursor in the second row and click once. You can see that the Power Query will detect a pattern and it will autofill the rest of the rows. So I'll go ahead and click OK. And you can see this step has automatically been added onto our applied steps. So I'll go ahead and close the Power Query editor. Now what I have to do is to come over to the Data Ribbon tab and refresh all. Now let's create our slicer to filter this report based on the month name. I'll activate the field list. We have the month name in here. I right click and add as a slicer. Now assume I want to only look at January sales, how each sales rep performed. I just click on January. You can see the report updates. Now remember, at the beginning we said that our goal was to automate the data cleaning processes, in that when we receive new data, for example May transactions data, we should not repeat any of the processes that we've gone through. What we need is just one single click of a mouse and the rest of the reports will update. So let's immediately test that out and assume that we've received the May data. So I already have the May file on my desktop. What I need to do is to carry this file into the folder that we started with. If you can remember, locate the folder that has the 4 files that we just cleaned, which is right over here. And now I can paste the May data in here. I come back to my workbook, and what I have to do is to click on refresh all, and note that the query will recalculate to include the May transactions. Yes, you can clearly see the rows of data has grown from 71,000 that we had previously to 90,518 rows of data, and you can clearly see from our slicers May has been included, meaning that everything is working perfectly fine. Now I know we've gone through a lot and you've seen how the Power Query can save you a lot of time, especially on your repetitive tasks. Now I want you to leave a comment and tell me what you think about the Power Query and the entire video. See you in the next one.